All right, joining us now is former New York Congresswoman Nan Hayworth. Nan is also a member of the Independent Women's Forum. And with me in studio is Richard Roth, founder of the Roth Law Firm and one of our favorite Democrats. Thank you both for being with us. Rich, I'm going to start with you. We have the Secretary of Homeland Security stating unequivocally that this is not a manufactured crisis, that this is truly an emergency. She is saying there is a crisis at the border, but Democrats are discounting her.
It's not just the Democrats. Here's the problem. The problem is it's like going to your father and him saying no, then going to your mother. There's already been a decision by Congress. Congress legislates. The executive branch doesn't. Congress already decided this is the amount of money we are giving for the border, period. And Donald Trump not happy with it now wants to declare this state of emergency, which just isn't the case. It's not a state of emergency. Let him try hard. But right now there are 13 Republican members of the House of Representatives who voted in favor of, if you will, deeming Donald Trump's state of emergency inaccurate. And he's got at least 4 Republicans in the Senate, and maybe as much as 9 Republicans in the Senate saying, Mr. President, you can't do that. Our job is to legislate. Your job is to be the executive. And what he's trying to do essentially is do an end run around the obligation to legislate. And it's been decided. Move on. You don't have a state of emergency. We'll go to the courts. The courts will inevitably make that determination.
Nan, the Homeland Security Secretary, as we said, she is telling Congress you're wrong. The U.S. does face a real, serious, sustained crisis at the border. She's defending the president's declaration of a national emergency to obtain more funds. But as Rich indicated, not all Republicans are supporting him. Should they be?
Well, you know, Michelle, I think we have to draw a distinction between Republicans' support for border security, including the border wall. And of course, the border wall has been strongly endorsed by those who are charged with protecting our borders in terms of personnel on the border, namely the Customs and Border Patrol, including President Obama's chief of CBP. They all agree that President Trump's request was entirely reasonable. I think you have to distinguish between that request and their support for that request versus the problems that they have with the nature of the National Emergencies Act, which does give the president broad latitude to declare national emergencies. And indeed, President Trump has already declared a couple of national emergencies. President Obama did before him, and all the presidents going back to when the act was passed. When we talk about a crisis, by the way, let's remember that one president who would agree with that assessment is, in fact, none other than President Obama, who in 2014 declared that we have a crisis at the border. It is a legitimate and serious concern. We have more than 250,000 incarcerated illegal immigrants, 2017 and 2018, more than 250,000, many of them for serious crimes, kidnapping, murder, sexual assault. We have drugs pouring across the border, although we have seizures at ports of entry. We have enough fentanyl, Secretary Nielsen mentioned this today, enough to kill every American twice over, every citizen. Most of that, 90% of fentanyl and heroin, comes in through the southern border. Customs and Border Patrol is telling us they need a wall.
So Richard, how do Democrats propose dealing with this then?
So here's why she's wrong. You're wrong because
how did the Democrats say we deal with this?
Here's how we deal with it. They dealt with it. She's wrong because Obama is not trying to do what Donald Trump is doing. The Congress has voted. The Senate and the House have both voted. Obama did not do that. There's a case in 1952. There was an action in which President Truman tried to Youngstown Steel case.
Very different, Richard.
Excuse me. Let me finish. President Truman tried to stop the steelmakers from striking. And the concurring opinion by the U.S. Supreme Court said there's 3 different zones. One zone is where the president does things without Congress's knowledge. The second zone is in the middle. And the third is once Congress has acted. The Supreme Court has ruled once Congress has acted, they've acted. There cannot be a state of emergency. You can't fabricate it. And what they're trying to do here is get public sentiment, Richard, when Congress has already voted. Nan, love you, but Congress voted. Obama did not overturn what Congress did. I mean,
Richard,
let's be clear here.
I said President Obama declared an emergency, and his fellow Democrat, now Speaker, once more, Nancy Pelosi, vowed entirely politically, let's face it.
Was there a Congress vote? Was there a congressional? Was there a congressional vote?
Hold on, let me speak. Richard, let me speak, that she would only allow $1 for the border wall. Nobody with any knowledge of our border situation agrees with her assessment. Her resistance and obstruction was purely political. The facts are on the president's side here.
All right, guys.
13 congressmen voted against.
We have a lot to have you debate about, so
we do.
Stick around. And back with us is former New York State Congresswoman Nan Hayworth. Nan is also a member of the Independent Women's Forum, and Richard Roth, Democrat and founder of the Roth law firm. Richard, we've got Democratic leaders continuing to expand their investigations into everything that is President Trump. They're now asking, at least the House Foreign Affairs Intelligence and Oversight Committee, requesting that the administration identify and make available anyone who participated in or attended or in any way listened to the president's in-person phone call with Putin, even though with Russia's President Putin, even though it's very unusual to ask for translators to appear before Congress. But the bigger theme here, Richard, this is just the latest in the House looking into absolutely every Trump-related matter. Some could be legitimate. Some Republicans are arguing is just a complete overreach here.
So here's what we have going on. First of all, we have the Democrats who have been sitting waiting for 2 years to look into Donald Trump. They obviously they just don't like him to varying degrees. Some don't like him minimally. Some really don't like him, want to impeach him. So they've had 2 years to just gnawing.
Is that a good reason to use my tax-paying dollars?
It is not a good
reason. They don't like him. Shouldn't they be doing other things?
But the second thing going on is that his inner circle has either been indicted or convicted. And his main fixer, his number one lawyer, if you will, spent 3 days going through everything of Donald Trump's. And quite frankly, he had nothing to lose. We can argue whether Michael Cohen was telling the truth or not, but not one congressman got up there and said and defended Trump. So there's a lot of things that went on. With Donald Trump, before he was even president, there was issues with Donald Trump University. There was issues with Donald Trump and his finances. There's issues with his business. There's issues with the taxes. There's issues with his overinflating his assets. So what Michael Cohen did is that I'm in the inner circle. I know this. And honestly, it's fair game. I mean, is it overreaching? I don't think so. If the president of the United States committed a crime, whether it's Stormy Daniels, whether it's inflating whether it's bank fraud, then this is stuff that the Americans want to know. We really do want to know that.
Wow, a lot to unpack there, including, if you mentioned Michael Cohen, of course, what Republicans would call tremendous lack of credibility of a convicted perjurer. But Nan, let's play to Richard's point here. Is it the job of the House to have oversight over all of these things? Should they be looking at all of these matters? Because the American people need to know, as Richard says, or is this overreach?
Well, Michelle, yes, the House is charged with oversight. So technically, not just technically in principle and in reality, it is their role to do so. However, I do think that we are not being well served as a public by the current House majority's obsessive attention and devotion of energies. And yes, Michelle, as you mentioned, public resources to an investigation of the president and everyone who has ever been associated with him, certainly in the campaign and the administration. As you know, the net they are casting is wide, and the question is why? What specifically do they have in terms of any sort of performance in office by this president that would somehow lead someone to believe that somehow he is violating the law that governs his conduct as president? We have nothing of that. And in fact, this does bring to mind, and I'm far from the only person to say it, Alan Dershowitz quotes it frequently, but Lavrentiy Beria of the Soviet leadership in the 1920s said, "Show me the man and I will find you the crime." Right. And that is what this feels like. It is just an endless investigation of what? There really isn't any, Michelle, any obvious cause for any of this.
Richard, let's unpack that. The one point, of course, is that this is what Republicans are calling, and many others, investigations in search of a crime. But let's flip this. Just like you have some Republicans and some Democrats saying with the national emergency declaration, if the president does this could set a dangerous precedent for when the other house is in power. Are you not concerned as a Democrat that when Republicans regain control of the House and there is a Democratic president, that they too will be able to do this, use all of these taxpayer resources to essentially do what many are calling is opposition research ahead of 2020.
You're right. And what a lot of what Nan said is right. The problem is that Donald Trump has so many low-hanging fruits. There's so many business deals he's been in, which are at a minimum shady and maybe at a maximum criminal. From the Stormy Daniels, I mean, we've never had a president who paid off a hooker.
Does this not set a dangerous
during an
precedent?
election?
Does this not set a dangerous precedent that the Republicans could do the same?
It could, but Donald Trump has his hand in so many different things, and there's so many potential illegal. I mean, what president do we know in our modern era who's had his entire inner circle either fired, quit, indicted, or convicted? So the problem with Donald Trump is that he's not a typical politician. It's not like even a Mike Pence. He has had how many presidents have not shown their tax returns? How many presidents have inflated their assets? There's a lot of things, and add to all of that, Michael Cohen.
We're running out of time. I'm giving
Nan
the final word.
The president had to complete a very extensive disclosure before he could run for president. Believe me, the president's assets, the president's obligations are well known to the FEC. They have not pursued any actions against him. The folks whom you mentioned, what Mueller's done so far are process issues, process crises that have nothing whatsoever to do with the president. The president is clean. This is a search for a problem. Show me the man, I'll find you the crime.
All right.
He has nothing to worry about.
Nan, Richard, thank you both.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.